It was late autumn when Rachel and Tom moved into the old house at the edge of town. The estate was large, surrounded by a tangled thicket of trees, and the house itself stood at the end of a winding dirt road. It had been abandoned for years, its walls creaking with age, but the price was right, and Rachel, eager to escape the bustle of city life, was drawn to the quiet isolation. At first, everything seemed perfect. The house had a certain charm to it. The wooden floors creaked as if the house itself was alive, and the fireplace crackled merrily, casting shadows on the walls that danced like silent specters. But, as with all old homes, there were oddities. At night, Rachel began hearing faint whispers, soft voices, just beyond the edge of hearing, murmuring in the dark. At first, she thought it was the wind or the house settling, but the whispers came at the same hour each night, just after midnight. One evening, Tom stayed late at work, and Rachel found herself alone in the house. She was reading in the living room when she heard it again, a soft, almost inaudible murmur from the kitchen. Heart-pounding, she rose and crept toward the source. The kitchen was dark, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the window, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The whispers grew louder as she approached, yet no one was there. She froze, feeling an ice-cold breath on her neck. It was then she saw it. A figure in the corner of the room, just beyond the flickering light of the hearth. A figure that should not have been there, a pale, translucent shape, wearing tattered clothes, its face obscured by a long, wild tangle of hair. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure turned slowly toward her, and Rachel gasped as the face became clear. It was the face of a man, gaunt and hollow-eyed, with a look of such profound sadness and despair that it made her blood run cold. The man opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, the whispers intensified, as if hundreds of voices were emerging from his mouth all at once, their words unintelligible but filled with an unmistakable sense of warning. Rachel backed away, her heart racing. She fled the room, slamming the door behind her, but the whispers followed, trailing her through the halls. They seemed to seep from every crack and crevice, echoing in the corners of the house. In desperation, she ran upstairs to their bedroom, locking the door behind her. Tom would be home soon, he would know what to do. But when Tom arrived, he found nothing unusual. No whispers, no strange figures, just an empty, silent house. Rachel insisted on leaving immediately, but Tom, ever the skeptic, dismissed her fears as a product of stress and exhaustion. After all, they had just moved in. The house was old, and old houses had their quirks. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences grew worse. Objects in the house would move on their own. A chair would shift when no one was near it, or a picture frame would fall from the wall without reason. And the whispers, they never stopped. At night, they were louder, more insistent, as if something was trying to communicate with her. One night, Tom was away on business, and Rachel decided to confront whatever was haunting the house. She gathered all the courage she could muster and ventured down to the basement, where she had a feeling the source of the disturbances lay. The air grew colder as she descended the stairs, the whispers growing more frantic, echoing through the dark, damp space. In the center of the basement stood an old, dusty chest, its lock rusty and worn. Rachel knew she had to open it. She reached for the lid, but the whispers grew into an unearthly shriek, the air thick with a malevolent presence. With trembling hands, she pried it open. Inside was a bundle of old clothes and a small, weathered box. As she touched the box, the whispers ceased, and the house fell into an eerie silence. Rachel lifted the box, her hands shaking, and opened it. Inside was a small, brittle piece of parchment, covered in strange symbols. But as soon as she touched it, the whispers returned, louder than ever, so loud that they felt like they were inside her mind, clawing at her sanity. The whispers became words. Asterisk, help me. Rachel froze. The voice was no longer a jumble of voices. It was one voice, desperate and pleading. Asterisk, help me, before he finds me. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the temperature dropped. A heavy presence filled the room and the air turned oppressive. A shadow emerged from the darkness, a figure taller than any man, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was the figure from the kitchen, the one that had haunted her dreams. But this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, from the darkness of the walls, came more figures, each one staring at Rachel with hollow eyes, their mouths opened in silent screams. The shadow spoke. Asterisk, you shouldn't have opened it. You should have left. Rachel tried to scream, but no sound came. The shadows closed in, and the house seemed to come alive around her, the walls shifting, the floors groaning with ancient malice. In her panic, she glanced at the parchment again. The symbols were changing before her eyes, rearranging themselves. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The room was silent again. Rachel didn't understand what had just happened, but in that silence, she realized something chilling. The house wasn't haunted by spirits. The house asterisk was the spirit, and she had just woken it. In the moment the silence enveloped the room, Rachel felt the floor beneath her feet slip away. With every breath, the air became heavier, as if an invisible force was crushing her chest. The shadows surrounding her began to move, slowly, imperceptibly, as if the very darkness itself were alive, intent on swallowing her whole. She remembered the words that had echoed in her mind just before everything went still. You shouldn't have opened it. You should have left. The voice was hoarse, like it came not from a living person, but from the very entity that had been awakened within the house. Rachel turned, panic rising in her throat, her heart pounding in her ears. The shadows around her stretched further, their shapes growing taller and more monstrous. She glanced toward the basement door, still closed, and it was as if she could feel it watching her, waiting for her to do something, anything, to feed its hunger. She didn't know what to do. It was clear now that whatever haunted this house wasn't just a restless spirit. The house itself was the spirit, and she had just woken it. Suddenly, the oppressive silence was broken by a voice, low, almost a whisper, but crystal clear in the depths of her mind. Please, help me. Rachel froze. The voice was not one of the hundreds she had heard before. This was different. It sounded desperate, a single, pleading cry, laced with anguish. The air thickened as the words repeated, each one more urgent than the last. Please, help me, before he finds me. She spun around, looking for the source. But there was no one. Just the suffocating darkness. The shadows shifted again, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw a figure emerging from the hallway. A tall, thin silhouette, moving with eerie fluidity, like a predator stalking its prey. Her heart raced as the figure stepped forward, its face obscured by long, tangled hair. The figure's eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to draw her in. It spoke. You shouldn't have opened it. You shouldn't have come back. Rachel stumbled backward, almost tripping over her own feet. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat was dry, her pulse thundering in her ears. The figure stepped closer, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Rachel thought she saw its mouth move again, but it wasn't words. It was the feeling of something scratching at the inside of her skull, something ancient and wicked. The figure reached out toward her, and just as its cold fingers grazed her arm, a new voice rang out, sharp, commanding, full of malevolent power. Stop! The air suddenly shifted. The figure recoiled, vanishing like smoke in the wind. A gust of icy air whipped through the room, and Rachel, trembling, tried to comprehend what had just happened. Another figure appeared, this one a woman, standing just beyond the shadows of the stairwell. She wore a tattered white gown, her face hidden behind a veil of wild, black hair. The woman stepped forward slowly, and Rachel felt the temperature drop even further, her breath coming out in visible clouds. You can't run from it, the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. This place, it will consume you. You opened the door, and now you belong to it. Rachel's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, struggling to breathe. The woman reached out, her cold hand brushing against Rachel's cheek, sending a shiver down her spine. It's too late for you now. It's already inside. In a panic, Rachel scrambled to her feet and bolted toward the staircase. She had to get out of there. She had to find a way to escape this nightmare. But as she reached the top of the stairs, she saw something that made her stop dead in her tracks. At the end of the hallway stood the man, the same gaunt, hollow-eyed figure she had seen before, his face twisted with sorrow. But he was no longer silent. His mouth opened, and the words poured out, sharp and clear. You don't understand, he said. This house, this place, it's not just haunted. It is the haunt, it is the curse, and it will never let you leave. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She felt as though she were suffocating, drowning in the overwhelming presence of the house, its cold fingers tightening around her throat. Please, I don't understand, she screamed. What do you want from me? The figure's face softened, but the sadness in his eyes only deepened. "We were all trapped here," he whispered. You were never meant to be free." Suddenly, the entire house seemed to shift. The walls groaned, the floors creaked as though the very structure was alive, reacting to her desperation. The man began to fade, his figure dissolving into the air like smoke. "No!" Rachel cried, reaching out, but it was too late. He was gone. In the silence that followed, Rachel realized that she was not alone. The house was alive, and it knew her. Every room, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper in the dark. It was all part of something much bigger, much darker than she had imagined. But something was changing. The whispers were growing stronger, no longer just warnings. They were calling to her. "Help me," they repeated, but now the voice was clearer, more distinct. It was no longer a plea, it was an order. "Help us." Rachel staggered back to the basement door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. The voices were louder now, urging her forward. She didn't understand why, but she felt compelled to go down there, to open the door that had been sealed for so long. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and stepped into the darkness. As soon as she did, a blinding light erupted from the shadows. And in that moment, Rachel realized the truth. The house didn't want to kill her. It wanted her soul. Rachel felt the cold air from the basement seep through the crack of the door. It was a pull, a magnetic force that dragged at her very soul, compelling her to enter. She hesitated, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. Asterisk, "Come, help us." She had to know what was behind that door. She had to understand, the voices weren't just coming from the house anymore. They were coming from inside her. Her hands shook, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. With a sharp breath, she pushed open the door. The basement was colder than anything she had felt before, colder than the darkest winter night. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she could see the walls covered in strange symbols, drawn hastily, as if in a panic. They were ancient, some resembling runes, others like twisted, distorted letters she couldn't recognize. In the center of the room stood the old chest she had seen before, the one she had tried to open earlier. But now, there was something different about it. It pulsed with an unnatural energy, the lid vibrating ever so slightly as if it were alive. The whispers were deafening now. Asterisk, "Open it." The words swirled in her mind, commanding her. There was no going back. Her heart raced. She felt her breath quicken. Slowly, she moved toward the chest, the floor creaking under her feet. Each step felt heavier, as though the very house was watching her, waiting. As Rachel reached the chest, a voice, louder, clearer, echoed in her mind. Asterisk, "Do it, Rachel. Open it. Set us free." Her fingers trembled as they brushed the lid. The moment she touched it, the temperature in the room dropped drastically. A cold, suffocating presence filled the air. The walls groaned as though the house itself was in pain, but still, Rachel's hand did not waver. With a final push, she opened the chest. A blinding light erupted from inside, momentarily blinding her. She stumbled backward, her body convulsing with fear as a voice, no, a asterisk chorus of voices, screamed in agony. The whispers had stopped. Now, there was only one sound, the desperate cries of tortured souls. And then she saw it. In the center of the chest lay a dark, twisting mass of shadows and light. It shifted, changing form, becoming something that was not quite human but something far worse. The figure loomed over her, its eyes glowing with a deep, unholy fire. It was not just one entity, but a asterisk collection asterisk. A cursed thing made of souls trapped, tortured, bound to the house for eternity. The creature spoke, its voice a deep, guttural growl that reverberated through her entire body. Asterisk, "You freed us, but you didn't know what you were doing." Rachel recoiled in horror, her pulse hammering in her throat. The creature's eyes bored into hers, and she could feel the weight of its malice. Asterisk, "We were never meant to be freed. This house was our prison, but now, you have become the key." Her blood ran cold. What had she done? The realization hit her like a tidal wave. The house had never been haunted by ghosts. The house itself was a prison for asterisk them asterisk, a collection of spirits, lost souls bound together by an ancient curse. The chest had held them for centuries, waiting, and she had unknowingly released them all. But there was more. The creature's form began to stretch, expanding, becoming larger and more monstrous as it fed on the energy Rachel had unwittingly provided. The walls of the basement began to shake violently, the house groaning as if it were alive and angry. The air was thick with the weight of the curse, its dark presence overwhelming her senses. Asterisk, no, Rachel gasped, stumbling backward. Asterisk, I didn't mean to. But the creature wasn't listening. It continued to grow, feeding off the terror in the air. Its form took shape, twisted, grotesque, a mockery of the human form, but with features so distorted that they were barely recognizable. It had the face of the man from the kitchen, the hollow-eyed figure, but now his expression was twisted with rage. Asterisk, you will join us, asterisk, the creature hissed, its voice like 1,000 nails scraping against stone. Asterisk, you are the final piece. You are the one who opened the door. And now, you will belong to us. Rachel could feel herself being drawn into the darkness, as though invisible hands were reaching for her, pulling her toward the chest, toward the suffocating blackness. Her mind screamed for her to run, but her body wouldn't move. She was paralyzed, trapped in the house's vice-like grip. The voices were back, louder than ever, and now they weren't just whispers. They were commands, asterisk, demands, all speaking at once. Asterisk, join us. Become one with us. Rachel's body was no longer her own. The curse had taken root deep inside her, like a seed planted in her soul. She could feel the darkness creeping into her veins, its cold fingers curling around her heart, suffocating her, turning her into one of them. But then, just as the darkness seemed to consume her entirely, something unexpected happened. A flash of light, bright, pure, pierced the suffocating gloom. Asterisk, no, asterisk, she screamed, her voice breaking. But this time, it wasn't the house that answered. From behind her, a figure emerged from the shadows, Tom. He was holding something in his hands, the parchment, the one with the strange symbols. He was shouting something, but Rachel couldn't hear him over the roar of the voices. Asterisk, Tom, asterisk, she cried, barely able to speak. Asterisk, you have to, help me. He didn't hesitate. In one swift motion, he held the parchment to the chest. The moment it touched the dark mass, the house shuddered. The walls groaned and cracked as a blinding light flooded the room. The creature howled in rage, its monstrous form beginning to collapse, unraveling like a dying star. The voices screamed in terror, no longer demanding, but pleading, begging for mercy. Then, with a deafening crash, the house shattered. The walls crumbled, the foundations cracked, and the very air seemed to split apart as if the house had never truly existed. Rachel fell to her knees, gasping for air. The darkness began to lift, the suffocating weight slowly fading as the whispers died away. The house was gone, and so were the spirits. She turned to Tom, her hands trembling as she reached for him. He was breathing heavily, his face pale but determined. Asterisk, we have to leave, asterisk, he whispered, his voice strained. Asterisk, it's over. But Rachel knew it wasn't truly over. The curse, the house, the entity, it had been banished for now. But it would never completely fade, and neither would she.